Alcohol is the only drug that when you decide not to take, you are judged by your surroundings. The hepatic, cerebral, and behavioral repercussions of chronic alcohol consumption are well known by society and the scientific community. But there is an area that is not usually talked about. How does alcohol affect your precious muscle? What does science tell us about the real consequences of partying and drinking on muscle health and progress? In today's video, we are going to see up to 4 direct consequences on the muscle of consuming alcohol, both acutely and in more continued consumption. The last of the 4 is the most significant and detrimental. And if you stay until the end, I will give you some recommendations on how to minimize that harm without necessarily reducing your consumption to 0. How does alcohol worsen your muscle? Point number 1, it decreases the quality of sleep. Alcohol alters sleep homeostasis. Curious, because we're talking about a substance that millions of people use daily as an aid to fall asleep. What happens when you drink alcohol before sleep? Alcohol helps you relax and fall asleep faster, which is known in technical terms as reduction of sleep latency. This is perceived as useful in those who have onset insomnia. They have trouble falling asleep. However, it also significantly reduces your deep sleep. You fall asleep earlier, yes, but you sleep much worse. Plus, you frequently get less sleep. As we saw in the Better Than Yesterday episode by Dr. Alvarez about sleep, during the short period of deep sleep, your cells eliminate toxins and waste substances, in addition to tuning up all their machinery so they can serve you the next day. What happens if we shorten those periods of repair and maintenance? What you imagine happens, there's not enough time to clean the cell, higher chance of heart, mental health, or metabolic disorders. But beware, the muscle is also an organ that suffers from lack of deep sleep. And after a sufficiently intense training stimulus, as you can imagine, the muscle has a lot to repair. It needs deep sleep. This suffering caused by deteriorated sleep manifests itself in a tendency to lose muscle, more fatigue, less recruitment of motor units, we could say less brain-muscle connection, and a more inefficient muscle contraction. Training while in a calorie deficit will lead to fewer muscle adaptations and significantly deteriorated workout sessions. Another little-known consequence of alcohol on sleep is that it facilitates snoring and in susceptible people increases the number of apneas during sleep. These apneas by themselves greatly increase your cardiovascular and metabolic risk. Let's look at the second point. It reduces muscle recovery. We're talking about the most consumed recreational drug in the world. And athletes or sports people, whether amateurs or professionals, also don't escape its clutches. To improve your performance, increase hypertrophy, or generate more strength, you also need to generate training adaptations. Adaptations that involve proper post-training recovery. In other words, adaptations are generated in that period we call recovery. How does alcohol negatively affect this element? In many ways. First, it negatively impacts the immunoendocrine function, reduces blood flow to the muscle, minimizes muscle protein synthesis, that construction and repair of myofibrillar proteins. Within the fiber or muscle cell, alcohol alters anabolic signaling, mitochondrial bioenergetics, and remodeling of the extracellular matrix. Simplifying terms, alcohol minimizes muscle building, alters the energy that muscle produces, and deconstructs the muscle's extracellular scaffolding. As if that weren't enough, the resynthesis of glycogen and hydration of muscle tissue are greatly impaired. So, alcohol, point number 1, reduces the quality of your rest, and point number 2, reduces your body's ability to recover from that stressor, which is training. We're not saying you won't recover, but it will be harder, and obviously it will be harder the more you drink. 1 beer won't cause noticeable changes for most, but 5 obviously will. Moving on, it decreases the quality of training in sessions or without achievements. If you go out with your friends for a bachelor or bachelorette party over the weekend and drink enough alcohol, something that usually happens, the Monday workout won't be very good. Has it happened to you? It's just a silly but real common example. Alcohol consumption increases central fatigue. It's the opposite effect to what you get to understand it and give an example with another substance when you consume caffeine. Caffeine reduces central fatigue. That is, the perception of fatigue generated by your nervous system, and alcohol increases it. In fact, at the brain level, alcohol has an effect to some extent antagonistic to that of caffeine. If you remember, caffeine blocks adenosine receptors as it has a very similar molecular structure. This prevents adenosine from binding to its receptor and generates wakefulness and attention for a few hours. Well, Alcohol does just the opposite. It causes more adenosine molecules to bind to the receptor, generating a relaxation and sleepiness response. At the same time, it enhances the neurotransmitter gamma-aminobutyric acid, which is predominantly depressive and anxiolytic. This is important because behaviorally, alcohol is going to generate a feeling of relaxation, tranquility, and anxiolytic effect that you can link with better recovery. Be careful. Sleep can hook you in the same way. You might think that alcohol helps you rest better, and the opposite is true. The opposite. That's why I always say it's a very deceitful and convincing drug. It deceives easily. As a user, aside from technical details, just know that your workouts are going to get worse. When? Well, we can say 24 to 48 hours after a considerable intake of alcohol. And you don't have to be very scientific to realize this. Your workouts will be of worse quality. If you're into strength training, weights will feel heavier. You'll be able to do fewer repetitions and overall the intensity will be reduced. If you're into endurance, the time until fatigue will also be reduced, not to mention the pro-dehydration effect that alcohol has. And one last point, the pro-fatigue effect and the direct weakening effect on muscle fiber will generate an additional risk. In the sessions after intake, your risk of injury will be much higher. So I can't train the days following drinking. Well, my recommendation is that you lower the intensity, that you don't do very technical lifts or with weights that you don't master, that you don't go to failure, and that in general, you leave more room for recovery. It decreases muscle protein production. Alcohol is a toxin that negatively affects both the heart muscle and the skeletal muscle. Chronic alcohol consumers, cardiologists know this well, are at higher risk of what is known as alcoholic dilated cardiomyopathy. The cardiomyocytes weaken, worsening their contractile action, and the ventricles end up dilating. The result is a larger and a weaker heart, which can lead to heart failure. Now, this occurs in heavy alcohol consumers, in people who have an alcohol addiction problem, but it is a clear example that the toxicity of alcohol on the heart muscle exists. Well, but what interests you? What happens in the skeletal muscle? In your biceps, in your quadriceps, in your latissimus dorsi. Both acute intake, getting drunk one night or 2 nights in a row, and chronic intake, 2 or 3 drinks a day, have negative effects on muscle protein synthesis. The more ethanol, the less muscle protein synthesis. The following text is incomplete and cannot be shortened without more context. The muscle is a tissue that has to work a lot, you already know that. It's like a factory where 2 processes always occur. Construction of new myofibrillar proteins, which is what we call muscle protein synthesis, and destruction or catabolism of the same. This is a dynamic process. You're always building and destroying muscle, something known as turnover or protein exchange. Well, there are elements that enhance construction and elements that enhance destruction. Cancer enhances destruction, while protein intake and therefore amino acid intake enhances construction. The balance of these elements will be derived from a conclusion, whether you maintain increase or lose muscle mass. What does alcohol do from the minute it enters your body? It helps destroy muscle. It's a catabolic factor. Why? Because it has a direct toxicity on muscle fibers. Obviously, we don't have to be alarmist. This is a dose-dependent effect. The more alcohol, the more catabolism and the more problems. Will drinking a glass of wine or a beer have a catabolic effect? Yes, but minimal. It will also happen if one day you don't reach your maintenance calories during a period of stress or a respiratory infection. And we all go through that, and it's okay. If you notice, most people with a chronic alcohol consumption problem have very weak muscles and are in a state of malnutrition or undernutrition. And hopefully you won't get to that point. But in the realm of the majority, occasional drinkers, what you need to know is that drinking worsens your muscle gains. You can improve, but it will take you longer. Having said and understood this, of course you are free to decide when it's worth punishing your muscle in favor of a good party or celebration. That decision is yours and individual. So, Borja, how do I minimize the damage to the muscle if I want to drink alcohol? Maybe this isn't the right question. There is no way to drink alcohol without consequences for your muscles and overall health. If there was one, we would all use it. And even though we are all aware that the best consumption is 0, the reality is that very few people are going to opt for complete abstinence even after knowing the risks. What I would advise you as a risk reduction strategy is the following. Being aware and remembering the points in this video is a good start. I mean, with this, you already gain a lot. Most people don't have this in mind. You also have another reason to limit consumption if you want to maintain your muscle mass. And it should matter. Second, Some reviews say that if you are going to drink anyway, avoid doses above 0.5 grams per kilogram of weight. Below this dose, most aspects of muscle recovery will be preserved. For a 154 pounds person, this equates to 2-3 beers of average strength, but no more. As for drinking on a full or empty stomach, which is better? Well, it depends. Look, it's always said that you should eat before drinking. Well, if your goal is to drink little or as little as possible, but achieve the disinhibition and euphoria effects that alcohol generates, then you're going to reach them sooner on an empty stomach. Your blood alcohol level will rise much quicker. Now, if you're going to drink more, then eat. Why? Well, because you're going to delay absorption, and you don't want a very high peak of blood alcohol level in a very short period of time. The more you eat, yes, the harder it will be for you to feel the effects of alcohol, and you'll probably drink more alcohol. This will result in the consequences discussed in today's video. As I've mentioned, if you drink alcohol, allow more time for recovery in the days after. If you drink a lot, resting 1 or 2 days can fit perfectly. If consumption is more moderate, reduce volume and intensity in the next session. Be careful with the risk of injury in those sessions. Hydrate well hours before it and stay active during the day. Lastly, although alcohol is usually consumed at night, if you can consume it in the afternoon, the famous tardeo, which is now in fashion, you will have an advantage, as it will affect your rest less. Rest is more compromised 4 to 6 hours post-ingestion, so the less you consume, the less negatively you will impact this specific point. Now you have more information to use to your advantage. Questions? Leave them in the comments and we'll address them. A big hug, thank you for your attention, and keep on empowering.